Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening from wherever you log in to yet another episode of the Accessibility Podcast of NABIT India. Uh, I have today the pleasure of having a veteran of the space of the IT services, and she has been having varied experience working across different markets, right from the Middle East to Singapore, and even, of course, the West, and has done considerable work, a person who has been a champion in the journey of diversity and inclusion too, and has also been working in the space of technology. Uh, I'm proud to have today my guest, Nida Sahar. Nida, thank you so much for NABIT and from the audience of the podcast for consenting to be a part of this. And it's such a pleasure hosting you today.
Thank you, Arjun. Extremely honored to be a part of the podcast and looking forward to having a wonderful conversation with you.
Likewise, Nida. Nida, before we start, for the interest of the audience, more about Knife, the organization that you co-founded, and what does it do? And also, briefly, if you could help us through your journey of the years that you've spent in the IT services, and as you've co-founded your new organization, rather not new, it's been some time, but more about that. Over to you, if you could brief the audience.
Yeah. So, Knife is cutting complexity of cloud. That's what we
Okay.
do. We stand for cutting complexity and making things simpler. So, Knife is a dev tools platform that can take care of helping customers deploy their applications on cloud or on on-prem infrastructure or 5G infrastructure. That is what we've been working for last 3.5 years, I believe, from ideation to now, when we are live in the market. About my journey itself, I passed out of college, like how we say in India, passed out of college in
Hmm.
2008. Did my
Hmm.
engineering, moved on to do a
Okay.
bunch of entrepreneurial courses, was in
Right.
corporate for about 10 years, Hewlett Packard, Oracle, EMC Square. And then one day I decided to, quit my job and pursue entrepreneurship. I built women in tech
Yeah.
communities in Bangalore, focused more on Indian ecosystem because diversity became extremely close to me. It is still very, very, very close to me, actually.
Hmm.
Both design communities as well as women in tech communities. I'm still associated with anitab.org, where we are focused
Okay.
on bringing more women in technology.
Right.
And there's a whole bunch of things that I've done on diversity part of things, and I still do.
Hmm.
And Then went on to co-found a fintech startup, and this is my
Right.
second startup, I would say, officially on paper, though unofficially I've explored quite more than that. Beyond this, I
Hmm.
also run a program called Startup Leadership Program, which is
Okay.
also in a pro bono capacity, but it basically
Okay.
helps out startups to scale and grow. That's my full-fledged journey, Arjun.
And I have done my research on my guest, and I see that you were from a business family. You had a history from your perhaps from your maternal side, who was from business. So it comes, I think, in your blood to lead businesses. And I'd seen an interview of yours, which is featured, I think, on one of
Yeah,
the
actually,
Google
both
searches.
maternal and paternal side.
Acha. Okay.
Fortunately or
Nice.
unfortunately, matlab, on
Uh,
my paternal side, frankly, the day I turned 18, right, next day I had my PAN card. The first thing that I
uh,
got done was get a PAN card because I started filing IT when I was 18, and I didn't know
okay.
what
Nice.
Form 16 was or whatever forms I was getting
G.
to
G.
sign. But the sides of my family are heavily involved in business.
Oh, nice.
Very intuitive way of doing business versus whatever
Hmm.
formally I have learned. And in
Hmm.
fact, every single day, beyond my investors, my paternal and maternal uncles, right, they ask me
Hmm.
more difficult questions about if I'm doing my business properly. Yes.
Awesome, awesome. So it's then great for the nurturing new talents that you. It's part of the program which you're running to get such a seasoned professional with you on the team. So,
Yeah.
what inspired Knife, and a little more around how it's also working towards web accessibility, which is the overarching agenda for the podcast. So how does it work towards when you serve your clients? How do you reach out on the subject of web accessibility and its importance, especially in the Western markets uh, or outside India markets? And what are your views on the future of web accessibility, say in India?
Got it. So, the context of web accessibility is not a simple context. Frankly, it has
Hmm.
been about for donkey's years, I would say. So even in my earlier stint in Hewlett
Sure.
Packard, when we were trying to bring in user-centric design, right? We would call it UCD at that point of time, or CX design per se. And there would be a certain agenda that were targeted towards making it more accessible. So accessibility at that point of time meant localization or internationalization, and then slowly it took shape of having buttons in a certain shape or having text of a certain length.
Right.
How
Right.
can we bring in more braille related stuff, or making it a little bit more easy. Those were the
Hmm.
contexts, but I always saw it being pushed back for whatever
Okay.
reasons in the
Okay.
agenda of the ecosystem. Like, they would bring in certain aspects of it, but they would not implement it end to end.
Acha.
And
Okay.
then the context of accessibility is picking up a lot more today, because compliance is
Hmm.
now, there are
Hmm.
a lot of web accessible compliances that have come in, and I've seen
Ji.
more and more users talking about it, not just in Western India as well. They're talking
Hmm.
about it, but then I just feel that the market is going to pick up, but it has not yet picked up, right? So let's start with the reason why it is important. It is
Hmm.
important because there's a humongous sense of people who need to be, I would say, I'm not choosing the right word for it, but
Hmm.
the more identification is becoming important,
Hmm.
diversity, inclusion is becoming important, and from an inclusion perspective,
Hmm.
everyone needs to be included. So this is
Hmm.
one thing. The second thing is beyond inclusion, right? There is an entire sect of audience that people are disregarding completely, more
Right.
from a B2B, forget about B2B, but B2C side of things.
Hmm.
There are
Hmm.
more people who need to be included, who are on jobs, who are on payrolls, who cannot access your
Right.
systems that are being designed. More and more
Absolutely.
organizations are now having an inclusion as a part of their entire thesis of hiring, and so you're not serving those audiences, right? So
Exactly.
everyone wants to have an extremely inclusive system per se. So what we've noticed is, as you know, as a startup, right, how you start,
Hmm.
you try targeting the mass audience first, whoever is your
Correct.
target audience. We built a platform like that, and then we got in some UX plugged in, and we got in a little bit
Hmm.
of CS into play, and then we realized, hey, there's a certain sect of audience that is completely being missed out, and this is
Exactly.
something that we're very very focused on right now in order to make things move forward. Now, the other
Hmm.
thing that I've noticed is, beyond this application part of things and beyond knife part also, light
Hmm.
speed, which is your paid speed guidelines which Google gives for SEO,
Hmm.
right? So
Hmm.
last
Hmm.
month onwards, they started showing accessibility as a green checker. So while my
Okay.
paid speed is fine, my
Hmm.
usability is fine, and my 10,000 other things Google looks at is fine. One of the four
Hmm.
indicators they have is accessibility. So suddenly
Hmm.
everyone in the ecosystem of websites, and everyone in the ecosystems of anyone who uses Lightspeed suddenly is looking at, oh, you for SEO, Google is very very what do I say, strict or diligent about having accessibility as a part of it. So that's where I see the bigger need right now is, and this is not just for the Western market, right? This is for Indian market
Hmm.
as well, and
Absolutely.
any market in the world.
Hmm. And Neera, something which goes unsaid is that with age, people generally have you know concerns with vision which develop, and
Yes.
I think the myth around I that is my I may be wrong in my assumption, but I feel is that people do not understand the volumes which are getting neglected, which are not being able to participate, and what is the business loss which goes into not having a product or service available to a segment. And I think uh, it is that highlighting that numbers which are devoid of participation, which would bring the business case into making it accessible. And rightly what you pointed out about how now SEO has also been with Google is also, and with Lightspeed is also talking about how accessibility is also one of the important check marks for page ranks. And if that is enforced, I think it will make more business sense. And when things start making more business sense is when it automatically becomes a part of the process. going forward.
Yeah, I mean, if I look from the eyes of, hey, what is a market size, which is what
Hmm.
typically I think a lot of people, you
Very
would have
true.
had these interactions with people, right?
Hmm.
When I look
Hmm.
purely from the angle of market size, then it obviously will not make sense for you, because you'll be like, who are these people? I don't interact with
Hmm.
them on a daily basis. But if you
Hmm.
look at it from the perspective of compliance, and if you look at it from
Hmm.
the perspective
Exactly.
of, hey, somebody is going to blacklist your website since accessibility is not there in place, and this is nobody, this is Google, right? So you
Yeah.
really want to do something about it. You want to do it
Hmm.
now, and you don't want to
Hmm.
do this after a year when they
Hmm.
start blacklisting or whatever, which that's the reason why they have an indication already.
Yeah, I think compliance is a combination of compliances and combination of maybe a monopolistic business like Google setting the standards. Compliances are already also in the Indian market. Onwards from 2016, an act has been passed. I think you would be aware. It's called the RPWD Act, which now mandates all digital content. It had given 5 years time, which was extended for a year more, and onwards from December of 2022, businesses which don't comply are liable to be taken up to courts or have litigations in them for non-compliance to accessibility. Now, of course, the legal process is tedious, justice takes time, and so on and so forth. But I think the good part is at least there is a law which enforces compliance with intent, or for those who don't have the intent, at least, but the stick of the law, being on them. So it's a combination, I think, which will eventually set the need for this, and something which we keep highlighting quite frequently. It's not a very expensive proposition, which is often missed out by people's mind, that it's something which is going to cost them a lot. It's just about setting procedures in place and a checklist, actually, which is complied to, which will ensure accessibility of your content. Unfortunately, it will perhaps take its time in India to catch up with.
No,
Going forward,
but
yeah,
Arjun, so the
yes,
question
please.
that the larger question that I have, and probably I'll be curious to know from you, um, as a business owner, right? It's a lot more
Yeah.
easier if I can think of everything that I need to have in my a product or my website or whatever, rather than going
Hmm.
and fixing it at a later point of time, right? Whatever
Exactly.
compliances you're talking about, like for example, might be reflective or come into action a year, 2 years from now, right? But then
Hmm.
if I'm thinking about making something now, then I should
Hmm.
have all this inbuilt within the thought process, and it's not going to then burn a
Exactly.
pocket later on trying to fix things. So that is
Hmm.
something that probably is very important for your audiences also, right?
Exactly. Fixing is actually a more tedious task. It makes
Yeah.
best sense to start in the very beginning with accessibility. That said, for business or websites which are already in in implementation stage or already prepared, uh, corrections can be made. And the myth around is also that there's going to be a change in the UI, and it's not that. It's not a change in the line of codes. It's not much change in the UI. It is also not giving a different URL for persons with disability to access. It is just making certain remediation actions on your assets, which is the websites or your application, so that a person with disability can also access it. It's something as small as having an alternate text to an image, as small as having the URL, also creating a more explanations in the subtext so that a person can understand. It's steps as small as these which actually make accessibility inbound to a product, which is often overlooked at development stage.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
But that's fine. That's how things are. Uh, so, when you approach for knife services, do you get or do you also implement accessibility into the solutions, or do you hear from your potential customers around the subject of accessibility? And I ask this from a point of outside the country, because I think eventually, if it is not present in the country and if the laws are in place, then we can have a preset model that has already worked in other places. So, what has been your interaction with businesses to this?
Right. So we mostly come on the cloud side of things, right? So when it
Hmm.
comes to cloud, there is very less of product usability that comes into play per se.
Hmm.
So we don't get questions asked on accessibility.
Hmm.
So customers are not very keen on knowing if a product has accessibility inbuilt or not.
Hmm.
However, our
Hmm.
customers are very keen and inclined to know if certain compliances have been met. So
Okay.
again, it
Okay.
depends on which company we are talking to.
Hmm. Hmm.
Most of our
Hmm.
customers are very inclined on the GDPR and SSC2 related compliances,
Hmm.
not so
Hmm.
much of an accessibility related compliances. This is something that I have noticed, but maybe because our line of work is mostly on the other side of the work, which is cloud. I think that's the reason why our customers are not very keen on. But I have to believe that there could be certain industries that would be
Hmm.
very focused on having companies that are extremely diversity and inclusion focused companies are definitely going to ask for compliances related to accessibility as well, because if they have that as an agenda, and these are all enterprises, yes, so they have options to go to other companies than what you have. So it's a lot
Hmm.
more better
Hmm.
to be prepared when you go into enterprises and have all the compliances that are required for that particular company as well. So also it's become like a badge of statement now, right? It's really become like
Hmm.
this badge that you
Hmm.
wear that you're doing some work for
Hmm.
diversity, and
Hmm.
it gives you those brownie points or goodie points. Even
Yeah.
when we were working for women in tech, kind of a thing, we saw a lot of companies just wearing that brownie point because they were hiring women, or certain women were in CEO positions and stuff like
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I have noticed you having that badge saying that you're already accessible is a brownie point.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think maybe because what happens is the standards of accessibility, although common, have a little bit of customization basis the countries, and also basis the region which we serve. So the
Sure.
standards of accessibility, for example, in the US is called WCAG standards, and then there is a standard of accessibility which is different, though a little more in depth when it comes to the European countries, and so on. And of course, India has its own version of accessibility, which it sets as an expectation. Now, what happens is while there is commonalities to the expected standards, there are certain more steps or edits which are made to the rules of accessibility, which is to ensure compliance to the place of business, which the business of which the organization is operating in. Now, do you get queries around potentially in you? I understand that your line of business has a different set of questions which are put up, and more
Hmm.
around accessibility, and rightly pointed out around how businesses can wear this, just like they talk about more inclusion for women employees. Even being accessible is something which can, but what I'm trying to understand is that just like we have the women in tech roles, if
Mhm.
perhaps it is marketed more frequently or spoken more frequently around how accessibility is also important for companies, and if there are solutions which are built into standards of compliances, which companies, as you mentioned, were very particular about, perhaps with the right marketing made around accessibility, that can also be inserted amongst the standards. I see that already happening when you mentioned about how Google is making accessibility as a checkbox. And if there is more advocacy around accessibility, I think that would also lead to questions being asked by potential businesses whether or not the solutions being offered are accessible. Do you think it's a problem of lack of knowledge or a lack of want for accessibility, or is it to do with lack of advocacy around it? That people aren't aware about whether or not the product is accessible.
Yeah, I think it is a problem of advocacy, frankly.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so, um, I mean, I was at Google I/O 2016, okay,
Hmm.
and in that Google I/O, back in Mountain View, there was an entire booth talking about. There was this one thing about material design and design aspects of things. There was this entire booth talking about how to make systems accessible. There were sessions on it, right? So,
Hmm.
so Google can do this. Google has the power to do this. But how many companies do you see apart from Google talking about this or bringing this out? So this is
Hmm.
something that I've noticed that in the region that we are in, like India region, right? We have very few people focused on design per se or wanting to have inclusive solutions. Okay, so
Hmm.
I think when I was running Hexagon UX, we had people from human centric design, right? And this is
Hmm.
beyond accessibility, that is web accessibility. This is talking about IoT systems that need to be accessible, right?
Hmm.
And there are so many design concepts that people tend to lose out on, and I have noticed that there are only few segment of people talking about this. Now I would
Hmm.
attend the session then over there. I have this thought process that something needs to be accessible, but
Hmm.
when it comes down to implementation, I haven't heard it in that long time, right? I haven't heard it since
Right.
2016, 17, whatever. And then when I hear it again, I'm like, oh, I should have done this. So whereas if
Hmm.
you see the same thing, take the same, I'm not trying to
Hmm.
balance out or
Hmm.
weigh out different inclusion activities. But if you look at women in tech, right? Just look at,
Hmm.
there's an Ola ad, Ole ad right now for women
Hmm.
in STEM, for example. You hear
Hmm.
it
Hmm.
so much, right? So even
Hmm.
as a person who's biased or whatever in terms of hiring women, blah, 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 you want
Hmm.
to mellow down and you want to think about, hey, am I doing this right or wrong? So I
Correct.
just feel it is a problem of advocacy. It's not a problem of people not wanting to do things or people not wanting to move forward. It's just a problem of um, have I heard it enough that I want to
Hmm.
include
Hmm.
certain things as a part of the design or certain things as a part of the ecosystem? To add to it also awareness, right?
Hmm.
I was
Hmm.
telling you the other day about this entire scenario where how many people do you know who are going through something or have
Correct.
um, issue.
Hmm.
Every lift in corporate, if you look at, forget about corporate,
Hmm.
non-corporate, every lift has a braille interface, for example, right?
Exactly.
For people.
Exactly.
But how many people do you see in corporate actually taking the lift, right?
Hmm.
Are
Hmm.
using the braille interface, right? There's
Exactly.
a reason
Exactly.
why it is there. The reason
Hmm.
it's there because you want to be
Different people
inclusive.
catch. Hmm.
Yes,
Right.
you
Right.
want to have those platforms for people with wheelchair to use it, right? But then corporates have that implemented, but how many people are using it? So it's also a problem of how inclusive an organization is being. Are you shying away from hiring resources who are
With disabilities.
you know,
Hmm.
who are differently abled, or is it
Right.
a problem for you? Is it a problem for the corporate itself that you haven't seen that many?
Hmm.
I think that's a bigger issue. I would say because very early in my career, my first job,
Hmm.
we
Hmm.
used to come back in a shuttle,
Hmm.
long 20 kilometers
Hmm.
stretch.
Hmm.
And there was
Hmm.
this one guy who was blind, who was
Okay.
working with us. Okay.
Hmm.
And this guy, and I kept wondering, most days I kept wondering, what do you think his job? And this is when I was very naive. It's like my early
Exactly.
20s.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I was wondering what do you think he does? What do you think? And he's talking about using computer like all of us do. He's talking about,
Hmm.
hey, I was
Hmm.
coding this, I was coding
Hmm.
that. And then
Hmm.
somebody asked him a question, what do you do on Saturdays?
Hmm.
We are so what do I say, blind about what other people's lives are. Somebody asked him a very weird question saying, what do you do on Saturdays? And he says, I go play cricket. And that
Hmm.
person is like completely in disbelief, saying, how can this person play cricket, right? And then
Exactly.
he says, no, I go play cricket, I play catch with people, blah 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 blah. I'm just like a normal person, except I don't have eyes. That's all it is, right? And he's learned how to operate things. He learns he's done it. Why is this person in the company that I was initially working in? Why was he there? He's there because he's completely eligible to be there. He knows
Exactly.
his way around and he's
Hmm.
qualified, right?
Exactly.
The
Hmm.
more you see people being accommodated in setups like this, the more
Hmm.
you feel you're responsible to ensure your products can reach to them. So
Exactly.
even now I cannot for head of it understand how he would have operated his laptop, because I'm assuming there was braille and other things like that, but he was
Hmm.
perfectly normal in terms of his logic, his business
Hmm.
capacity, his everything. So
Exactly.
so
I
I
think
think that is, yeah.
No, sorry, sorry, Neera, you were saying something.
Yeah,
Please, please.
I think inclusion, right? If you wear the right glasses to see the right set of talent,
Hmm.
inclusion and getting more people like this, or getting more people itself, not looking at it from who is abled or how they're abled. It's about hiring the right set of people, which is very important.
Absolutely. Nida, you have had the experience of driving companies to adopt greater women in their employee workforce, right? And
Yes.
you have brought out some very important points on why and how something. I understand it's a different segment of people who we are going to be, which we're talking about. but there is a lot of scope for replication of those successes which has been achieved. And let's say every person, irrespective of gender, irrespective of disability, comes with their own set of challenges. So when companies have made respective accommodations to ensure that there is greater representation of women, even there was some additional deployment of resources, there was some additional customizations. Let's say if it was a cab service, they had to ensure that safety of their employees who are using that cab service. Now that was beyond what was available, right? About what which was the status quo then, but they ensured that. Similarly, if there's a person with disability who is also part of the organization, and like you rightly pointed out, the lifts which we use have braille available. They were made with the intent that they could be potential persons with disabilities who could be part of the organization, and they require independent navigation. And our
Yes,
braille encryptions would help that. It was not made just for a design purpose. So
exactly.
the idea was that potentially there would be greater participation, representation of persons with disabilities. Abysmal numbers actually in the private sector as of now, which speak of their participation. I think that's a lot more around not lack of skills but advocacy, that they are as normal. You and I have been exposed to, but there's a huge numbers who do not know what are the present advancements in technologies that make a simple laptop for that case as usable by a person who's visually impaired. How does he use talkbacks, and what are the assistive devices which he or she uses so that he can perform as proficiently and as independently as anyone else. I met a company and was looking for opportunities of employment, and they were like, we cannot keep coming up with braille encrypted data of customers for making outbound calls. And I said that is not required. That is a story maybe 15 years back. So it's to do with not having enough exposure working with persons with disabilities,
Agreed.
and it's those challenges which needs to be advocated. And I think that this podcast, and God willing, if I have more such episodes coming in the future, is targeted towards that. That let's identify a problem, let's come back with solutions to the problem, and of course, then it's about potential companies who have the intent to match up to that intent. So, Nina, around the space of advocacy that you mentioned, you have, in your organization, or when you speak about accessibility amongst, different organizations, and you talk about diversity and inclusion. Um, does Knife, in a way, when you spoke about women-led businesses, what are the popular pushbacks, if I speak about that, you have faced, wherein companies have been reluctant to include? I ask this because that could also be a learning for advocates for inclusion for disability. That I understand may not be the same set of questions, but they may be more specific to the challenges to work. And how have you countered them?
Got it. I think there are two parts to this question, or two parts. A little bit is the backstory of long ago, when I was in corporate, and then I was doing a little bit of work for women in tech at that point of time. What we had noticed was there were two problems to women, right? One problem was the whole diversity and inclusion. One problem was women not feeling confident enough and not ready to pick up certain jobs. The other problem was the biases that people had in terms of hiring. I think it's a similar set of challenges that you will also see, Arjun. It's one on one hand,
Sure.
you will see that a certain set of people will say, "Hey, my job can only be this. I can only be a certain category,
Mhm.
even though they might be skilled enough to do a certain category of job altogether." The second thing is bias. The hiring manager has a bias, saying that a certain person needs to be hired than the other person. So what I have noticed, and it's been so many years that we've been working in this space, that things have reduced, like biases have reduced. Okay. On the other hand, I've also seen women stepping up, and the newer generation of kids, especially, they have a different mindset when it comes to wanting or asking for certain things which women of a certain generation were not able to do it. This happened primarily because of a few reasons. One of them being women started seeing role models in a certain career ladder, and they had seen examples of it,
Right.
right? On the other hand, there was a lot of education around why biases had to be let go. The managers had to let go of biases for certain set of people. What I've noticed is the biases have reduced, but not drastically. Okay, so
Of course.
a certain times when I'm pitching my product, I'm still technical, frankly, and when I pitch my technical product, I do see those biases show up on the other side. One, isko kya pata hoga, right? Like, what does she know? They would rather prefer a male counterpart talking about the same thing. So I have to bring in a male counterpart in certain scenarios, even though I don't want to. But I have seen that happening, and it's the same problem. Like, imagine in US when long ago, when we didn't have this many Indian CEOs. Imagine brown people trying to raise funds. It's the same problem. What they would do is they would team up with a foreign national, and then they would go and pitch in order to secure certain funds. And now that there are so many more Indian CEOs and everything,
Exactly.
people are more accessible to that. So I think it's going to be the same problem with any kind of inclusion. Starting with, hey, biases have to be reduced. B, in order to circumvent the biases, we need to get our demography right in terms of, making them feel that not feel, making them confident, getting over imposter syndrome, building a little bit of risk taking appetite for them. And on the
Right.
other hand, ensuring that they have the right jobs that are accessible. That is, a certain percentage is allocated for hiring, and also ensuring that the right people go there, create examples, and there are
Exactly.
enough examples for other people to follow through the roles. I think that is what my recommendation really would be. Um, Touching upon that, I also feel that a lot of people who are disabled, for example, tend to feel that a certain set of jobs is what is required for them, which I feel very unfortunate, even though they are educated enough and they are capable
Right.
enough, right? So when we hire a person, at least in knife, when we hire a person, we don't look at their background. We don't care how much English they know, right? We don't care about what gender they belong to or what sex, caste, which country they belong to. We don't look at that, right? Inbuilt in our DNA, we just look at, can they do work, right? So I think that is the most important thing. So if I get more people applying to jobs, right, I can actually hire more people of a certain caliber coming in. So for us, the only thing important is, can you do work? So
Right.
that is something that I really want to highlight, because I mean, I was telling you the story that we worked with initiative. There was an organization, a vocational training organization, which was creating engineers. They were out of jobs, as in they were shutting down completely, and there were people from two batches, I think 50
You mentioned.
kids or so, yeah, 50 kids or so who were now not on jobs. Secondly, they could not finish their diplomas, right? And the only option we got them to place, of course, we went around corporates and we tried helping them out. This was a pro bono thing again. So we tried helping them out. The only option we got was to put them off into some role, like, a waiter kind of a role or a hotel management kind of a role, right? We just found it very, very, what do I say,
Depressing for them.
not
Yeah.
fair at all. Not fair
Yeah.
at all, because these are kids who have a technical background. They know how to operate a computer. They should be on a
Correct.
job that can actually make use of the talent, right? So this is something that I'm finding it more and more unfortunate, and I'm finding it more and more not right, as in something should change, right? And I believe you're bringing in that change by giving jobs also.
Hopefully. No, hopefully, and God willing, that should happen. Just one last question, and I ask this with your experience of bringing significant change for representation of women in tech. What was the power of influencers? Did you use certain people who were basically the uh, so-called advocates for greater participation, who were heading or were the hem of companies to pursue this program and to endorse it? And also, what is the power of associations? You mentioned about how you had created, you know, women leaders who had already found representation in companies and associations of such women to drive the future for greater participation. So, just to these specific things, if you could address.
Yeah, I mean, surprisingly, this is not my karna. I mean, this is not something that I did. In
Hmm.
1987, there was a lady called Anita Borg. Anita B.
Okay.
Anita Borg. Anita B. Org is named after. She went
Hmm.
around and created a community called Sisters in 1987. Okay, probably
Okay.
um, before I was born, or I don't know, around that
Hmm.
time. And she said women are not allowed to talk freely within organizations where they're employed. And remember, most women at that point of time probably were at a secretariat role
Housewives. Hmm.
and not
Hmm.
at a different kind of role. And there were very few women in on jobs. So she created
Hmm.
an anonymous community and she said, I want all of them to be together. Like, I don't know how many there were at that point of time in that mailing
Hmm.
list, probably 50, 25, I don't know. But the idea was
Hmm.
women need to group together and we need to
Hmm.
find a way in which we can grow together. Right? This was a thought
Right.
process that it started off with, and then women started creating this community across the world, getting more women, empowering more
Hmm.
women. And even today, we can post anonymously about a certain mishap, a Me Too, or whatever, whatever, right? This is one thing that happened. I think what happened in recent past, at least last 10 years, there was a concept that was created called ally. Okay. So who's an
Hmm.
ally? Ally is a male counterpart because we're talking about two genders at that
Hmm.
point in time, and even now we talk about two genders. So an ally is a person who can advocate more women in tech or women in
Okay.
business or women in whatever. So the identification of these allies at a corporate level and identification of these allies at a SMB and a startup level actually played a significant role because
Okay.
women were mentoring each other
Hmm.
informally, formally, that was happening, but
Hmm.
the other gender supporting women was not
Hmm.
happening. So
Okay.
when this started happening, it became responsibility of that person, whoever was a VP or whatever, to
Hmm.
ensure that this person is not overlooked, whoever
Hmm.
they mentor, or this gender is not overlooked. So they
Hmm.
became responsible and they started advocating for this quite a lot. And then the allies that were created, and it became again like a badge and a brownie point, frankly,
Hmm.
for senior leaders to be allies, because they were talking about
Okay.
inclusion, and inclusion was super super, super important, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So this is what I noticed happening quite a lot. When it came
Hmm.
to influencers, I think it was I wouldn't say the influencer route. I mean, influencer again has different connotations. It could be your social media influencer. It could be like a big ticket VP of some company and stuff like that.
Hmm. Hmm.
So women were always supporting women. That was there,
Hmm.
but there was a certain set of issues when it came to or rather a thought process that was going on in the market saying women don't support women or are jealous of other women, right? There was a
Hmm.
lot of connotation around that was going. So I
Hmm.
really don't know, until unless you were like a Kiran Majumdar Shaw or somebody else who
Hmm.
was leading Biocon or something like that. We didn't see that many women to be there. Like literally, there were
Okay.
days when you would count who are these people, like how the
Hmm.
problem is with diversity on the other side of the things. We have to count who are these people, right? So it was that kind of an issue at that point of time. So that many role models were really not there, and the ones that were
Hmm.
there, were always
I
played
agree.
down with something. Yeah.
No, but then that's a learning for people who are working towards diversity and inclusion, and especially for the transgender or for the persons with disabilities, and the finding greater representation at work. Is that what were the key learnings that that you shared, and how that customized to can also be implemented for getting greater
I think
participation?
Yeah,
Proceed.
I think one other thing that went around and that happened in that era, and I think that still happens, is sharing the stories about more such people,
Hmm.
right? So
Exactly.
who are
Hmm.
these people who made it big, right? Even if it's like a
Hmm.
small story, and people started drawing inspiration from not just women in corporate, for example, like Mother Teresa or Lady Curie. So
Hmm.
people started drawing with the slightest of intersection. People started drawing inspiration from other sources where women had done greater job. I think that is something that was shape shifting. because
Mm.
till then, like, dude, in my college, sorry for my language, but in my college,
This is right.
um,
Mm.
I was probably, handful four women studying with
Mm.
a group of 160 men or something like that.
Mm.
And I was in an all girls school. So just
Mm.
imagine coming from an all girls school to an engineering college and not having seen that
Mm.
many women, right? So
Mm.
the more you are in encounters like this, even in
Mm.
corporate, I would be the only girl in the entire room for the longest time, even though you would hear the same thing people telling for 40
Mm.
years ago or something like that. I still was the only woman. So the more and more you hear stories about what is
Exactly.
happening, how people have
Mm.
grown, the more you
Mm.
draw inspiration and you say, hey, this is possible, right? If so and
Mm.
so can do it in this particular scenario, so can I. So I think that also was very, very shape shifting. And organizations like Google, I think organizations like AnitaB.org, there are a whole
Mm.
bunch of organizations who actually helped out other people to see that this was possible. We had calendars. Like I have a card
Mm.
game,
Mm.
the Tash Ke Patte, right? I have a card game that
Mm.
I got at Sisters, which talks
Mm.
about every single woman,
Mm.
as one card.
Mm.
So I
Mm.
wouldn't
Mm.
play with it, but at least I know who these women are. You know what I mean to say? So I think
Mm.
those things actually help out quite a bit.
No, absolutely, and I would be reaching out more to you because I think rightly, touched upon. The problem is about advocacy. It's not we don't have the talents available. It's just that people are still not aware and confused about what a person with disability is capable to do, and in that confusion, we limit them to roles which are quite either we don't give opportunities, and even if we give them only for entry level roles, which I think is not matched to their education qualifications or the qualifications in general. That's the problem which needs to be addressed. And yeah, I would think more, even beyond this podcast, to find ways in which success which you have had in getting women in technology can be replicated for persons with disabilities. And with that, Nida, thank you so much for your time. It was such a pleasure and an honor to host you, and look forward to the opportunity of remaining engaged further with Naif Labs and also with you for the betterment of the people we serve.
Yeah, thank you, Arjun. I should tell you one thing in passing though.
Sure, please.
Accessibility was not like super important agenda for me for a very
Mm,
long time, right? Even when I
mm.
spoke to you initially, it was not. But
I
after
remember.
this conversation with you today, and
Mm.
digging deep into my whole diversity and inclusion, this is something that I'm actually looking forward to get things done on my product as well, because I think it's really important. And if that is not there, then what diversity and inclusion am I standing up for, right? So that is what this podcast has made me realize, and thank you so much for it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And thank you so much. If I could get one more advocate with this, I think I've made my day. Pleasure
Sure.
speaking to you, Nida. Thank you so much
Yeah,
for your time. Look forward to staying connected.
thank you. Bye bye.
Thanks. Bye.